but if people don't understand how race works, then they don't understand how society actually functions and what's shaping them and internalizing with them. It's like learning a whole new operating system. You don't realize that there's a virus in the operating system until you pick it up. You have to track down the virus in order to understand like what the operating system should be and could be and what it is now.
Welcome, Ray Chang. I am so delighted and honored to have you on this podcast today. I've been waiting anxiously for many months to have you. The most impressive thing that I noticed about you, Ray, is that you have such a big heart for the community. I said, this is a pastor who really loves God, knows God, and loves his people.
Well, thank you very much. I do love God, although quite imperfectly, and I do love the community, although imperfectly.
You know, as a Asian American immigrant and a Christian, I've been watching what has been going on in our nation for a while now, feeling anxious by what is happening since, I guess, especially since COVID. And I wanted to hear from you as a leader of the community or faith community about what you think and, you know, what your impression is. And maybe you could guide us a little bit what our perspective should be and what we should do about it, not just being bothered by it.
Yeah. I mean, right now we're experiencing like a resurfacing of an old crisis, an issue that needs to have been handled for so long, yet it's never been fully addressed. We've needed comprehensive immigration reform for a really long time. A lot of the immigration policies are outdated and archaic, and so it doesn't actually help us become the type of nation that our principles kind of share and that we're founded on. And so, you know, one of the things that we see in the US is this commitment to be one out of many. And one of the things that we see happening, especially with the anti-immigration rhetoric, the mass ICE raids, the mass deportations, the essentially dehumanizing effects of what's taking place, is that it's not one out of many, it's just one above many. And that's a really big problem, especially for a country that touts its willingness to embrace people from any nation or any country. You know, the whole idea of sending those who are weary and brokenhearted and troubled so that they will be welcomed onto our shores is something that I think we're seeing actively being betrayed.
Mm-hmm. Such a big issue. And, you know, a lot of times I think, you know, just ordinary people don't know what to do about it except either complain or look the other way. But Ray, would you mind telling us a little bit about your background? Child of an immigrant.
Yeah. So I grew up in the Chicagoland area, but I lived all over the world. I lived in Korea, Hawaii, California, Guatemala, Panama, Spain,
Wow.
China, all for various reasons. Some with my family and my parents when they were moving. Panama with the Peace Corps, Guatemala to study abroad in high school, Spain to study abroad in college, China for short-term missions, and so on and so forth. And so I've lived all over the world, and that's really shaped me. But you know, home is the Chicagoland area where I grew up, where I was born, raised, grew up, and then you know now currently live again with my family. Um, and you know, for me, a big part of my own journey was I grew up in the immigrant Korean American church, uh, where I often felt like I was not Korean enough at church, and then out in the world I was too Korean. I still remember moments when I took, you know, oigimchi, which is cucumber kimchi, my favorite, to
Uh-huh.
school, or I wanted to take it to school. My mom would said, "Don't take that to school. You're gonna offend people." And I was like, "Why would my food offend people?" I didn't understand. And then only later did I realize, like, oh, this is why she said it, because she had experienced
Mm-hmm.
discrimination as a part of her own experience.
Mm-hmm.
Even though now I see people eating it all the time. They're selling it at
Costco,
grocery stores,
yeah,
Costco,
Trader Joe's, yeah.
yeah, Trader Joe's. It's not as good as Trader Joe's as the Harmonies down the street,
Oh
but
no.
it's still better than nothing. Yeah, and I'm either a seventh or an eighth generation Christian, and so I'm not sure
Mm,
exactly which generation it is, but I know that we extend, probably
wow.
to seven or eight generations Christian, which means that even before the Pyongyang revival,
Mm.
my family, my ancestors were believers in Jesus.
Oh my, what a
Hmm.
legacy you have.
Yeah, I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Mhm.
Wow. Uh-huh. You moved around so much because of your parents. Were they missionaries or just
No, they
business?
mostly moved around for business
Okay.
opportunities, and so yeah, that was a lot of the reason we moved. And then I
Uh-huh.
moved because of education or business opportunities or work or missions or
Mm,
volunteering.
mm. You're truly a third culture kid, huh?
Yeah, yeah.
Wow, amazing. So how many languages do you speak?
I speak one and a half now. I used to be able to speak three, but I probably speak a quarter Korean and a quarter Spanish and in English,
Okay.
even though it's not always the best.
You get by. You could get
Yeah.
by. That's cool. That's cool. For me personally, I am very intrigued and impressed by young Christian leaders that are able to think outside of the box of what we were told or taught through Sunday school and throughout Korean American churches, right? So that always interests me and brings me to pay attention. I just feel like as a believer, we need to, I don't know, be able to think beyond. Uh, you could hear my frustration. We could
Yeah, be
hear,
frustrated. It's okay.
yeah, we could beyond our what was told and what is inside the walls of the church, right? I believe there are many Christians out there who is wondering the same thing. How do we know when to speak up or when to be quiet and bring peace? Because we are to be peacemakers as well, right?
Yeah, and I think that's exactly the point. We're called to be peacemakers and not peacekeepers. I mean,
Mm,
obviously, it takes peacekeeping at times to make peace, but a lot of times to make peace, you have to engage in some form of conflict, right? Because uh, inherently, when there's not peace, there exists a conflict or an injustice or an inequity that's so normalized that it has to be addressed. And the way to address it is to engage in some form of conflict in order to achieve the peace that we need. But even if you look at our faith, it never calls us to be avoidant of conflict at all costs. It actually calls us to love God and neighbor. And sometimes that love looks like a quiet restraint, and other times it looks like very costly public courage. Now, for a lot of Asian Americans, we were formed and shaped by a survival mentality, especially as immigrants and immigrant children, to keep our head down, work hard, don't draw attention, endure quietly. There's false promises of attaining the American dream if you just kind of shed yourself of any concern around social injustice, and you just kind of accept the lot that you've been given in this society. And so many people kind of bought into that and say and just kind of come to this conclusion that they have to just take whatever is being given to them and not express it in any way, shape, or form. And it did protect some people in very difficult or hostile environments, but it also trained and formed people to equate the idea of being a good Christian with
mm,
not making any trouble or
mm,
creating any disruption, even when harm was taking place around or within us. And that's quite a big issue, especially because, we're called to, name the problems that we see so that we can address the problems. Now, the negative side of all that is a lot of times, we stew in silence, and we get frustrated in silence, and then it blows up in very unhealthy ways. I think that we need to find a healthy way to engage with issues or with people, so that we do conflict better, because generally Asian Americans really struggle with conflict, especially if they're Christian, and a lot of times it's shaped by kind of values.
mm.
Um, And there are times I'll also say that silence can be faithful, right? Proverbs talks about there are moments to hold our tongue, especially when we're being reactive or self-centered or
Mm.
needlessly inflammatory. You know, we see the discerning use of silence in the scriptures. Um, and sometimes staying silent can be helpful to create spaces to listen, learn, and examine our own hearts so that when we do speak, it does flow from a place of godliness, humility, prayer, and love instead of pride or fear.
Mhm.
Um, but then also it can be very harmful, right? Because there's a lot of shame forces that lead us to want to keep face, not cause any disruption, and then what that does is it leads us to having wounds that are masked, especially around big issues like abuse, racism, family violence, exploitation, all the forms of injustice, and people will suffer in silence and in
Mm.
isolation, and it actually doesn't protect the church in the long run. It actually drains the spiritual vitality and communicates to vulnerable people that
Mhm.
non-conflict is more important than their well-being,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's not helpful. It's not anywhere in scripture. And so I think people need to ask themselves, does my silence allow forms of evil,
Mm.
racism, or abuse to continue unchecked? You know, is my quietness protecting those who are powerful in abusive ways and abandoning those who are weak? Am I willing to confront them, directly, and if not, why? Sometimes we have to take on the posture of Esther and confront kings. Sometimes we have to be like Prophet Nathan and confront David. And we have to make sure that we're engaging where we are called to engage and not remaining silent to become complicit.
Mm.
And so, obviously the gospel doesn't only reconcile us to God, it also sends us into the world as witnesses who call out sin and pursue justice. And as Asian Americans, maybe we are at this time
Mm.
being called as a generation to come out of silence in healthy ways to claim a legitimate voice in the wider church and society for the sake of things like racial reconciliation, gender equality, political equality, socioeconomic justice, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. Yeah. There is a personal call and there's a community call. What keeps you up at night, Ray, these days? What are some of the callings that you are eager to answer?
Yeah, there's a study that was done by Michael Emerson, and he basically said that overall,
Mm.
white Christians are less religious and less religiously engaged than every other type of Christian. And here's
Mm.
what that means: they pray less, they read the Bible less, they worship less, so on and so forth. They serve less, they volunteer less. You just go down the list.
Mhm.
The other thing that he wrote about in his books, The Religion of Whiteness, is that you know um, 2/3 of white practicing Christians um, don't actually worship the Jesus of the Bible. They worship the religion of whiteness.
Mm.
Here's why this matters for us.
Mm.
So much of Asian American Christianity, especially within the Protestant vein,
Yeah.
basically tries to mirror what we see in the white Protestant, white evangelical stream.
Yes.
And what we're seeing at a macro level is that white Christianity is shrinking and diminishing faster than every other group.
Mm.
And Asian Americans, when they're not discerning about things, are trying to replicate what they're doing. And as one of my friends a lot of times says, is that because ministry is so imitative, we're
Yeah.
just doing something that's clearly not working. My concern is that Asian Americans are following the trends of a lot of white Christians and white
Mhm.
Christianity, and it's leading us in a direction that's unfaithful to the gospel, unfaithful to Christianity, unfaithful to Jesus, and distorting our understanding in the ways that we shape Christianity, to the point that Asian Americans and Asian American churches are disengaged from all these issues in which historically the Asian American church was very actively engaged.
Mm. Mhm. Mhm. Yes, disengagement is such a huge issue. Even most of us are immigrants or children of immigrants. And even when the the ICE issue or the undocumented immigrant issues came up in the media, it was all over I saw so many people, Christians, acting as if, oh, that's their problem. It's their story. I'm not illegal. How can we understand this issue? Like, what is the correct way to see this?
So I think a part the what I just shared about kind of how we've adopted whiteness into the Asian American kind of expressions of Christianity is very relevant to this, because what we see as a core feature of white Christianity or kind of the religion of whiteness is that it's hyper individualistic to the neglect of our brothers and sisters, and it focuses on things like proximity instead of the global body of Christ, that it focuses on like close relationality instead of kind of the welfare of the whole society, of the whole community, whether you know them or not. And here's a perfect example. A lot of times within white Christian spaces, one of the things that you'll hear regularly is that that they shouldn't feel any sort of remorse or sadness because of what their ancestors had done in holding slaves or participating in exclusionary acts or promoting forms of promoting forms of segregation, like under the Jim Crow laws. When who comes from more of a communal background, who has more of a disposition around honor and shame over innocence and guilt, when I heard that in Vietnam there were about 40,000 children who were essentially birthed by Vietnamese women from interactions with Korean soldiers and Korean military men, I felt a personal sense of sadness as a part of a collective group, even though none of my family members served in the Vietnam War. None of my relatives served in the Vietnam War. I don't even know any Korean military personnel that served in the Vietnam War, but I felt a deep sense of responsibility for that.
Right.
And I think that communal disposition is something that we immediately lose, where the Bible's always talking about the one another's, love one another, care for one another, bear one another's burdens, protect one another, so on and so forth. And the way we understand that now is very different than how the scriptures intended it, which was always to be about and for everyone instead of just those that we have a preferential, that we have a preference for.
Isn't that so crazy that, as a group, Koreans are very communal. We're a community of people, and how quickly we lost that.
In one generation.
And
in 2 generations.
yeah. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Huh. Yeah. It's so, I don't know. You know the word proximity. I think a lot of us, Korean Americans especially, are very, especially second generation Korean Americans, very well educated, very well to do. So our lives really rarely intertwined with the undocumented immigrants or the poor, the poverty stricken community, or, people who are in crisis. We have actually we may never come across someone like that unless we're intentional. So I think, for us, a lot of times it's just like unreal. Really? Is that really happening in the world? So it's very, I guess we need to be intentional about bringing ourselves into this type of, or the community around us, because they are around us.
Yeah. And I mean, 1 out of 7 undocumented people in the US are Asian American, right? And so it's not a small number of Asian Americans that are undocumented. And as I keep talking to ministry leaders throughout the country, some of them who voted for the current president are realizing that what they did was vote to get their congregants deported. And so I know one church that lost 3 people. I know other churches that lost a couple, and so on and so forth. And so they don't know what to do because there's no playbook for this. Within a kind of the white Christian frame, what you'll often hear is, well, you leave the policies up to the politicians, and what we do is we care for the people that are within our congregation, um, and if they get deported, then they get deported, and they won't say that third part, but that's essentially what they do, because I'm seeing it happen in a lot of different communities where brown and Asian American kind of, or brown and Asian kind of congregants are basically feeling like their whole communities and their kind of so-called multi-ethnic or diverse church have abandoned them because they quote unquote broke the law, even though not everybody did. And quite frankly, if you look at the statistics and the data, most of the undocumented people are, pay more, they're high, they have higher rates of paying their taxes, or they have higher rates of, they have lower rates of committing crimes and so on. So they're actually contributing to the economy, but then they're also bringing, greater forms of religiosity and civic engagement because they're so thankful to be here. And then, their church community turns their back on them.
Ray, I wanted to keep this very neutral to be safe.
Yeah.
But I heard someone, a Christian leader, someone I really respect and love, said, I voted for the values, not for the person.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, like, how am I supposed to understand this? Those issues, the immigrant issues, abortion, homosexuality, the things that Korean church are supposedly very, very engaged and care about, are those really the things that we need to vote for? Is there something
No,
that,
so
yeah.
I mean, like, you see Christian values on both aisles, and you see non-Christian values on both aisles. It just depends on, which values you want to kind of elevate and which ones you either want to diminish or ignore. I mean, this is why I'm an independent. I just don't think either party is the answer, but I know that I work and operate within this political system, so I have to constantly navigate. And so a lot of times I'm going back and forth. I'm looking at all the candidates. I'm looking at their character as well as their policies. And clearly, historically we cared about the character of leaders. It doesn't seem like a lot of Christians care about the character of leaders anymore, because and the reality is, a lot of people are voting more for economic policies than moral issues. They'll say that they care about moral issues, but when you look at what drives them to vote or what drives them to engage, it's oftentimes economic issues. And so I think that people are just choosing which Christian values to uphold. I don't think that either party is in any way, shape, or form Christian.
Yeah. Unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel the same way.
I will say one does a great job of um, trying to diminish Christianity on the left. They don't see Christianity as a real viable kind of expression. And on the right, they do a great job of weaponizing and manipulating Christianity to serve their purposes. I'm like, which poison do you want? Both are terrible. So I'm like, yeah, I don't think either works.
Yeah. Weaponizing and yes. Oh, definitely. Interesting. Ray, tell me about AACC, Asian American Christian Collaborative.
Yeah, so we were birthed out of the pandemic and the kind of felt silence across the country around kind of the anti-Asian rhetoric, Kung flu, China virus, and the knowledge of what happens in history when powerful leaders or political leaders essentially use rhetorical terms that target our communities. And so put out a statement. That statement went throughout the whole country. It was pretty widely kind of embraced. And then we started an organization as a result of that. And we've been around for now 6 years, really kind of pushing and advocating for Asian American Christians, engaging with the church and helping to work with the church on a variety of issues. And so, we've been we've done a lot of work engaging churches, pastoral formation, creating a network, creating a platform for Asian American Christians to be heard, as well as especially those that care about justice from a Christian framework and from a scriptural framework. And then we've also done a lot of advocacy work, which has taken us from municipalities to the city governments like Chicago, all the way to the White House. And so, so we've done a lot of different work protecting houses of worship, anti-Asian racism, cross-racial solidarity, education, and other mental health and other topics like that.
What are some of the things that you're working on right now?
Yeah, so we're kind of pivoting towards a conference every year or two, and so we will have our next conference in September in LA called at Tapestry LA, and so we're excited about that. And then we also have a pastoral gathering, and then we do other things like for Next Gen, like kind of raising up leaders. We do things like mental health efforts to work with Asian Americans engaging with mental health issues, and then we do a lot of other things like write, we'll put out some research. We just recently put out a study on the state of the Asian American church, and so we have a whole report that's on our website that you can download.
Interesting.
And then we have some curriculum that people can use, especially integrating Asian American identity with their Christian faith.
Okay, I need to read on that.
Yeah.
A lot of churches, I think, pivoting or changing into that sort of environment, not just Koreans or Asians or Hispanic church, but diversified churches. A lot of churches, because I live in North Carolina, Charlotte, North Carolina, are mostly white. And there are some churches that, my Asian American friends attend to mostly white churches. And always there is some kind of a curriculum, even at work, actually, about diversity, right? And do you work with those type of curriculums, that kind of group? What do you teach? What is one thing that you bring to them?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of like working with multi-ethnic churches, I do a lot of that, and I just preached at one this past weekend. I do a lot of like speaking. It just depends on what people are looking for. But if it comes down to like leadership development, spiritual formation, discipleship, kind of understanding race, Asian American identity, understanding kind of multi-ethnic church stuff, like those are stuff I really kind of engage in and do a lot of speaking on. I will say, to your point, Asian Americans are the only racial group across the board where we attend churches where we don't make up the majority. So most white Christians will go to a white church. Most black Christians go to a black church. Most Latino Christians go to a Latino church. Most Asian Americans will go to a white church or a white dominant multi-ethnic church. And so you could still have a majority Asian Americans, but still have a dominantly white culture in those spaces, because we've been influenced and shaped by kind of the white Christian realities, curriculum, thought leadership, conferences, seminaries, and so on and so forth. Koreans are the most likely to be at a Korean American church or an Asian American church, but even that doesn't fit over 50%. And so there's something worth asking, like, why is it that Asian Americans are the only group where we don't attend churches where we make up the majority? Not that diversity is bad. I'm all about diversity, but I'm also about, making sure that we don't get erased in the process, because, it's unity in diversity, not uniformity in diversity. And so a lot of the church expects a time for uniformity. The other piece that's worth thinking about is that the diversity only flows in one direction. And here's what I mean by that. Most churches that are diverse because minorities go into kind of predominantly or dominantly white churches and not the other way around.
Because I used to work in nonprofit. And I would go to this yearly conferences, and there's always something about diversity and understanding the cultural. And I never felt like, as an Asian woman, that we're being represented at
Yeah,
all.
totally. Nobody represent. Yeah, I mean, in almost every country, or not every country, in almost every conference, nobody knows what to do with Asian Americans, and then the only Asian Americans that are there are the ones that are fully assimilated into the white frame.
Yeah, yeah. And usually I'm the only Asian person in the room anyway. Um, and then I remember one session, it was about racial equality or justice, right? And then the presenter was talking about black and white. And she saw me in the audience, the only yellow face, and go, oh, this is not about black and white. It's about all races. But then she continued on talking about only black and white. And I wondered, that's understandable. I mean, there's less examples until now. But as an American, one person, what can I do? Like, what can we do, Ray, to change this scenario? Or as maybe a drop.
So this is where, yeah. So the most useful, the most helpful thing is essentially just attending things that are by, for, and about Asian Americans. And so, like, one of the ways in which we demonstrate kind of presence and power, not in the kind of the bad ways, but in the good ways, is by clustering together. This is why we don't get diluted, is because we have some Chinatowns and Koreatowns and little Tokyos, little Bangladesh, and so on and so forth. Because most people don't realize, like, you can't really elect someone into office unless there is a concentration, because we're all discipled by race. And sadly, a lot of times we're kind of shaped and formed to elevate whiteness above all else, including ourselves, whether we believe that it's true, or that to be true or not. But one of the things I tell people to do is, when you invest your time, your treasure, your talent, your conference budget, your book budget, buy from Asian American authors. There's more and more that are out there worth, like, listening to and reading, and there's more and more that's being published. That we have a whole kind of selection of Asian American books for our daughter, and the books that we don't have, we're trying to figure out how do we produce them, and things of that nature. And we don't buy books that don't have either a good amount of diversity, and so we're buying a lot of Black, brown, and Asian American books, just that we can kind of feature a lot, because a lot of times, even in those books, you'll see at least one white person, but even in a lot of white books, you'll never see an Asian person, right? And so you'll see that happening. And so, yeah, I mean, that's one way to do it: buy from Asian American authors, read their books, promote their stuff, follow them on social media, connect with AACC on social media, follow your podcast, and share about
take
your
1.5 podcast.
Yeah,
Yes.
1.5. And then like, go to the conferences. Like, there's our conference. That it's all on our website. There's others that are worth looking at. It's harder where you are because there's a lot less Asian Americans, and so you kind of have to have a small community doing the work locally as well as participating in something national. But if you do come to something national, what's helpful is that you get a vision of what things could be or should be like. Because a lot of times we just kind of become conditioned to accept the surroundings that we're around, and it just doesn't help.
As a small town Asian American Christian, I'm interested in social justice, especially for Asian Americans, right? And you said congregate, gather more and more, support each other, follow one another, encourage one another. What can I do? Is there any direction that, someone like me could take?
Yeah. I mean, so actually, the youth curriculum that I have, that we have with ACC, we had adults go through it with their kids, and they love it. And the adults are like, I didn't realize this until now either. I mean, I think start there. Start with going with a group of people through the curriculum, and then read a bunch of history books. Those are helpful. And then, like read the articles that we have on our website or,
Mm-hmm.
what others have. I just think that there's so much out there
Mm-hmm.
um, that's now much more accessible, especially because of, the internet and now AI. Um, and then, make sure that, like, I mean, one of the things I'm encouraging people to do is go to a Korean American church or an Asian American church, mostly because, like, one of the ways in which you show up as a community and one
Mm-hmm.
of the ways in which the church kind of makes itself known is through the congregations. And so what if we've learned anything from kind of the pandemic is that a lot of churches that aren't made up of Asian Americans don't really care about Asian American issues or the Asian Americans within those congregations.
But, I don't know if Asian American churches really care about Asian American issues either.
That's 100% true. Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
because one of the things
because,
that you'll also see is like
yeah,
Asian American Christians will
uh-huh,
give to their church, missions, their family, and then to a white organization. They don't give
right.
to Asian American issues. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're
So
100% right.
the question is, as a church, you said get educated, read these articles, share this curriculum, da da da. As a member of an Asian American church, I don't see people, even, when you're the person is praying in the front, weekly prayer, what do you call it? Like,
Yeah.
the
Presiding.
elder or whoever is
Mhm.
praying. I never hear anybody praying about these issues.
Yeah. 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 I mean, there has
Um,
to be a willingness to engage.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so when you are going to these different churches, organizations, or meeting with the pastors, what are some of the things that you encourage other than, yes, read about these things, get educated, follow, and congregate and support one another? What are some like
Yeah, I mean,
practical
so some
things?
practical things are,
Mm,
I mean, on top of their own education,
mm,
it is to find ways to integrate them into the worship service. So, either during the congregational prayer or, during the sermon to incorporate it. Missions is a good way to look at things because, a lot of times for Korean Americans, we think about missions as a global kind of activity instead of looking at it as a local, kind of regional, national, and then global, which follows a trajectory of, from Jerusalem to Judea to Samaria to the ends of the earth. And there is a kind of concern for every kind of realm around us. I would say, like, hear what the needs are. The other thing is, I would say, kind of create or form a committee that's helping the church understand how to navigate this stuff, because a lot of times the transformation happens at a one to one relational level, and one of the things that's helpful is when there are kind of scripturally tied commitments and values to whatever activity you're doing. Because, I mean, if you just read the Bible with kind of a basic exegetical lens, you'll see that it's a pretty radical text. It's radically justice oriented. It's
mm,
radically oriented around holiness. It's radically oriented around grace. It's radically oriented around community, and radically oriented around the kingdom of God. And when you look at how the kingdom is articulated, especially if you contrast the Beatitudes between Matthew and Luke, a lot of people read the Beatitudes only in Matthew, which emphasize more the spiritual implications. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. But in Luke, there's an emphasis on the material and physical realities. So blessed are those who hunger now. And so it says we care both about the spiritual and the physical, that they're one and the same, that they're connected to each other, that we're going to eventually have fully resurrected bodies. And so how we treat ourselves now is extremely important, especially as we are thinking about, bearing witness for the gospel.
mhm, mhm. So, if you were to call our attention to one topic or issue, what would that be? And also, the last question I have is, how can we live out our faith? Because I know many of us want to, but don't know like exactly how to do that.
So I think in general, for Asian Americans, the thing I would say is understand how race works. Read
Mm,
the history of race. Read about how it was established, how the church was complicit in that in the 1400s, how, the church was active in shaping, which races were higher and lower, and then how it kind of forced a type of colorblind ideology that never dismantled the racial hierarchy. There's a lot there. There's history books that help you understand it. There's a book by Frank Wu called Yellow. There's books by Erica Lee called Asians for America, and then the history of Asian America. There's a lot of great things. Ronald Tataki's books, The Strangers from a Different Shore. I recommend all of those.
mhm.
They're doing some really important work. Um, but if people don't understand how race works, if it's not, then they don't understand, how society actually functions and what's shaping them and internalizing with them. It's kind of like it's like learning a whole new operating system. You don't realize that there's a virus in the operating system until you pick it up, and you have to pick up you have to track down the virus in order to understand, like, what the operating system should be and could be and what it is now.
Great
um
analogy. Yeah.
yeah. And then I would say that, I mean, and then from there, you can engage with issues like racism, immigration, kind of, yeah, there's just a host of things, like basically everything that's on the news. You can find a way to kind of tie that back to scripture, or
Mhm.
at least have scripture truly inform it. Um, and then understand that the Bible is written primarily to a communal audience, not an individualistic one. So when you read the word you, or um yeah, that it's not like usually the you singular, it's the you all as a people, you all as a community, you all as a church, you all as a collective. And there is a kind of a new old measurement of unit of measurement through that. The second question, I don't remember what you asked.
It's how can we as believers live out our faith?
So the only thing that seems to be working is
Mm,
engage in local and regional and state politics. I think that you have to be educated on what's going on. The fact that there are kids who are afraid to go to school because they don't know if they're going to get kidnapped by ICE and then deported and separated from their parents and their families, or that parents are not going to work, and so their kids are and their families are essentially going hungry because they don't want to be separated from their kids, even though they're doing all the right things. I know several people that basically went to court whenever they were supposed to go to court. They followed through, and then they were deported, even though they had court dates and everything else in between. They've done everything right, and even then, it wasn't enough. I mean, there's a lot of fear that exists from a lot of people. So I think on the one hand, like getting engaged at that level, for their own sake, hearing their stories, and then finding ways to extend kind of compassion and participate in mercy ministries would be helpful. And then I think the most helpful thing is just like right now, because so many people like are unexposed to things. It's find a few accounts on social media and just share, share, share. Pick it up and text, 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 or email, email, email. Like people just we have so much information that we think we know more than we do, but so many
right.
of us are saturated in information in a way that leaves us ignorant.
I see. Huh. That's I never thought of it that way, but yeah, that's true. Okay. Okay. Wonderful. Well, I know there are millions more questions I have for you, right?
Anytime.
But we'll have to save it for next time. Yeah, thank you so much for the enlightenment. I feel very encouraged and inspired to do a little bit at a time as a one person. I think we could all do a little bit to come together, gather our support and strength, really be aware and care about. I hope that we don't lose that as Korean Americans, Asian Americans, the sense of community and the responsibility for one another.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was great to be with you.
Thank you, Ray. Take 1.5 podcast listeners and subscribers, please follow for more information like this. Follow AACC and Take 1.5 podcast to support the Asian American collab.